Good morning, everyone. I'm Serinda Martinetti, Sea Chicago Dance's Community Engagement Manager. Welcome to number 3 of our Dance for Camera Fundamentals workshops. Before I get started, I wanted to do a few acknowledgements. I'm so glad you could join us this morning. It's very early, I know, especially for Jenny. So grab your coffee, your snacks, water. Let's stay hydrated. And don't forget, we'll be having a couple of breaks. So don't feel like you need to get everything right now. To do a visual description of myself, I'm a light-skinned, biracial, Southeast Asian and European woman with short purplish hair. I'm sitting in my own home office with large windows behind me, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. I'd also like to recognize that my home sits on the traditional lands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. And I would also like to acknowledge the following statements. We work in different communities with different resources. We have different sorts of practice, and we have different aesthetics and politics. We use different language based on our own communities and situations, but we believe everyone in this room intends to be respectful. For this session, we seek to create an environment where people can speak freely without feeling worried that they will inadvertently offend someone else by the way they speak. We come together to share, reflect, question, and learn. If you're someone who tends to not speak a lot, I invite you to move into a role of speaking more. And if you tend to speak a lot, then move into a role of listening more. I want to tell everyone that this session is being recorded and will be released later for viewing, both for public viewing as well. If there's anything that you do not want to say, you can always pop things in the chat. I also want to remind you all that we do have the Discord channel to look at all of the resources that we've posted, to find notes, to talk to us, ask questions, post your projects, and just for extra engagement. For any workshop that you couldn't attend in person, you can go back and watch the archive videos, do the projects, and then go to Discord to post and ask for feedback. Today we have our wonderful guest instructor, Jenny Stalberg, but I wanted to start with making sure you all know Frank and Enki. Frank is on this side of my screen, Enki is on this side of the screen. Frank, could you give yourself a quick introduction and then pass it over to Enki?
Sure. I'm Frank. I'm the media specialist at Sea Chicago Dance. I'm also a filmmaker and a transmedia producer. Enki, go ahead. That's me. Oh, he, his, and yeah. I also respond to Stash, so you can do that as well. I will respond. Okay, go ahead, Enki.
Hello. I'm Enki Andrews. I'm a multimedia interactive artist who does, historically I did a lot of photography. I've been doing a lot more dance films over the last 6 years. I go by he, him. And I'm excited to be teaching this course. And as a prelude, today I'll be discussing dynamic range.
Enki, did you want to give us a quick overview of some of the other things that we'll be talking about today?
Yes, great idea. So we'll be, as I said, we'll be talking about dynamic range. We're also going to be talking about mood and how we can affect mood in our creations using digital cameras, cell phones, and DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. I'm also hoping to discuss variable ND filters so that we can control the amount of light that's coming into the sensor for particularly bright days, which is when you usually need them. And then also we'll be going over some camera apps that you can use on your cell phones to handle like capture and possibly even post-production and some different effects there. And then hopefully we'll also have a little mini project.
We're also going to be talking with Jenny about limitations and how limitations can often free yourself in the creation process. And limitations can be, choreographic limitations, space limitations, or equipment limitations. So that's going to be our first part of the discussion. We'll be taking 2 breaks within the day, around 10-ish, give or take, and then an hour later at around 11. I think before we get started, since we do have a few people here, I'm just going to call on each of you to give us your names, your pronouns, and anything else that you would like to share for this morning. So Claire, since you are first on my screen, I call on you to introduce yourself and also tell us what camera you have if we don't know already.
I'm Claire. I use she, her, hers pronouns. Here's my dog. That's what I'll share. Come here. I'm sure Surrender's seen her a few times in the many meetings I have her in, so she's gotten really big. This is Onyx. She's a rescue. She's almost 4 months old, and that's it.
Thank you. Just before we actually started recording, we were asking you about the lens you use. So Enki had a question about that lens. So did you want to tell us a bit?
I sent it to him. Sorry, that's for squeaking a toy. I'm so sorry. One of them is a 70 to 300 millimeter, and then the other one's 18 to 55, I believe.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Kennedy, you're next on my screen. If you would like to give us a quick intro, please.
Hi, everyone. I am Kennedy. I use they, them, she, her, and I have some experience with dance for camera in school, but I haven't pursued it, so I just have my little iPhone, but I will make the investment. And I am accompanied by a lot of tea and snacks today, so good morning.
Thanks, Kennedy. Rika, you are next on my screen.
Good morning. I'm Rika, she, her. Kind of a dreary morning, huh? So I guess it's nice to see bright people on the bright screen. I forget what else I'm supposed to be saying. Oh, so just experience with making filmy dance stuff. Yeah, just kind of started mostly because of the pandemic and, trying to adjust and find an outlet. And so it was kind of like, this will broaden and solidify the fundamentals with Enki and everybody's guidance. So very happy to be here.
Great. Amrita, are you there or are you unable to turn on your camera? That's okay. If you're unable to turn on your camera, you're also welcome to use the chat to ask us questions. And now let's get into our presentation. I'm going to hand over to Jenny to introduce herself and our first topic of discussion.
Thank you so much. Nice to see your faces again. I showed up for the first intro workshop and I'm happy to be back with you all. I'm Jenny Stalberg. I use she, her pronouns. I reside in Los Angeles, so it is 2 hours earlier over here on the West Coast. Got my coffee as well, feeling hydrated and feeling awake. Just to give kind of a short overview of my experience, I'm a choreographer, teacher, filmmaker, editor. I do some visual design, also do fitness things, but that's not relevant to this. But I first started becoming interested in dance for camera in grad school. I had a fellowship that was part of my grad program where I was in charge of mostly the logistics of filming and distributing footage for all of our performances at Tisch. And it first started off being just set up the cameras. If I was in performances and I wasn't able to film, getting other people to film for me. But I developed a real love for where the camera can take dance that we can't go in live performance. And I'm particularly interested in taking pieces that are created for the stage and what's the word that I was looking for? Reimagining them for film. And I have mostly what I'll kind of touch on today and talk about is work that I've done. I'm in Los Angeles currently, but I was in San Francisco for about 5 years. And a dear friend and creative partner of mine, Lauren Simpson, and I created a collaborative company, and we were making a breadth of work based on still life dances. Still life paintings, and we called it still life dances. So I'll talk a little bit about inspiration, which is really where our work came from, is finding that point and kind of just running with that element of inspiration. We used a lot of limitations in the work that we made, which in the beginning really scared me. And as Surinder kind of mentioned, it actually can be really freeing to limit yourself. And I think that, you know, we can hear the word limitation and it can have a negative connotation, or we can think that it's boring or inhibiting us from going other places. But actually, I think that those limitations, like I mentioned, can be freeing. They can be really interesting, and it can provide more context and kind of a framework for how your story can be told. And I do just want to say, if I'm talking about storytelling, know that it doesn't mean that it needs to be a super obvious narrative, or there need to be characters or anything like that, a plot, just meaning that we are all storytellers. So the story that we're telling through the art that we're making. And please also feel free if I am rambling or going too fast, or I say something that doesn't make sense, because sometimes the brain and the mouth work at different paces. Please just, you know, let me know. So I want to first start, I'm going to show two different films today. One to kind of, that's one of mine, to just kind of give you context of my work and show some of the limitations that my partner Lauren and I used in one of the pieces that I took from our stage work and made into a film. And then another to show a different example of limitation. But I want to first start off, I believe most of us have a dance background, if I'm not mistaken, and welcome and awesome if you don't come from a dance background. But something that's become really interesting to me throughout this development of my life as a filmmaker. So I started making films probably back in like 2010, 11. So I've been focusing on that and deepening my exploration and understanding of working as a filmmaker. And something that I think is really great about film and dance and combining the two is I find them to be two really beautiful expressions of movement. We might not think of film or cameras as movement, but there is so much movement that can happen in those, whether it's in the actual movement of the camera itself, whether it's in the movement of the editing. And I think that dancers and choreographers and dance makers make really great filmmakers and editors because of this, this connection that we have. Not to mention, being a very embodied person can make for a really beautiful cinematographer, because you have a good understanding of how the body moves. You maybe have some nice stability, and you can get in those really weird angles. I was just climbing on top of a trash can like 2 days ago to get a shot. So that can be a really good helpful element. But perhaps you are aware of, or if you're not, I know in my dance training throughout the years, this idea of the elements of dance was given or discussed, and it can vary for what people have. Is anyone familiar with or have heard about elements of dance? maybe, maybe not. Yeah. And it can be, I've heard a couple different descriptions for what is included in the elements of dance, but oftentimes it is, we're talking about body, space, time, dynamics, or kind of qualitative elements. And in thinking about dance on camera, it became pretty apparent to me that those are pretty translatable from dance making to filmmaking. So I'm going to share my screen with a little PDF I've created. Let's see. Can we all see this PDF here? Great. Come on. So typically, and again, these are just a couple, there's usually around 1, 2, 3, 4. There's usually 4 or 5 elements I think that people often talk about when they're talking about that. But for me, you know, when we're talking about creating dance and we're talking about the body, clearly we're talking about our physical body, our person that we move. And I feel like that is translatable to the camera itself. So we're talking about the hardware, right? So the hardware of our physical bodies when we're dancing, that can also be the hardware of the camera. It takes into account also any apparatus used, whether it's a gimbal, a stabilizer, a tripod, anything that you are using as a physical structure to create your film. We also talk about space in the elements of dance, and this is the physical space, and this could be the space where you are filming. I also think this talks about, when we're talking about space, and these are some things I know that Enki is going to talk about a little bit more, but depth of field. So the space that we are filming in, how do we play with that space, whether it's through the lenses of the camera, whether it's talking about, like I have written here, what the camera reveals and conceals to create a deeper understanding of the space. Are you using what's in the space as things that reveal and conceal, and playing just with the surroundings that you're in? We also talk about time when it comes to creating dance and the elements, the measured period during which the action, process, or condition exists. And this one I think can be a little bit more stretched a little bit more when it comes to filmmaking. It can be the duration of the piece as the whole. So, you know, is this the span of a day? Is it a few minutes? Is it multiple seasons? So the duration through which the piece takes place. It can also be speed and timing. This is more post-production, which we aren't doing in this workshop, but the timing of the edits. Is there a lot of fast cuts? Is there time lapse? Are we going in slow motion or speeding up? Is there reverse happening in the timing? Linear versus non-linear. So are we taking a dance phrase that starts at 1 and moving all the way through the end that maybe ends at 10? Or are we showing repetition that would be linear, moving from start to finish? Or is it non-linear sequencing where we're using clips happening from different moments in time? So the cool thing I think about filmmaking especially is the ability to really play with time. We can have flashbacks, we can jump forward, we can play with how fast something happens or how slow something happens, which we can't do in real life, unfortunately. And then effort or quality. To me, this is textural elements applied to footage and editing. So this can happen while you're filming, things that Enki might talk about today with settings you can place on your camera. It can deal with structure or elements that you specifically play with to mess around with the lighting. Do you have specific lights? Are you outdoors or indoors? Playing with in and out of focus. And then in post-production, the transitions and color filters and all the fancy things that you can add on in post that can play with the texture and qualitative elements of the film. So it was just kind of like an aha moment for me as a dancer and dance maker when I was able to kind of apply these ideas for how I create dance and movement using body, space, time, and a version of effort or quality, and how that can be translated to film. So for me, dance moving to the camera and this idea of dance on camera or screen dance just makes so much sense, because it just seems like such an art form that is just such a marriage of this idea of movement and this type of creation process and the elements that are involved within it coming together. I went through that kind of quickly. Does anyone have any comments or questions about anything that I talked about with that? Can I get some kind of nod or hand if any of that makes some sense? And maybe you've never heard about these elements of dance before, but hopefully now you have, and maybe this makes some sense. Cool, thanks for the thumbs up. All right, stop the share. Okay, so now let me move on a little bit to talking about limitations. So I can speak for myself, just as my non-dancer, non-filmmaker, just my human self. Limitations and boundaries are hard for me. And I don't know if there's this fear around what can't happen or what I'm missing out on. But if I think about different aspects of my life, that can be really a hard pill to swallow and something that feels challenging to get behind. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, I think that we can have this negative connotation for what limitations are. But if you think about, I was doing a little research and came across some articles and discussions about limitations in actual research and how that can be really helpful because it's giving context for the study. I'm not going to go into the scientific things of research and what limitations can or can't do, but if you think about it, it's giving us a framework for which we can work within. Otherwise, anything is game. So you could be doing research on, a medication, and all of a sudden we're playing around with and talking about, I don't know, furniture, and that makes no sense. So bringing, this framework and creating these boundaries can give us a place that we can live in, and we can feel a little more comfortable because we know kind of where we're going and what we're talking about. So something that my partner Lauren and I did, like I mentioned earlier, we created this breadth of work. I think we have about 10 pieces that we've created together since 2014, and kind of going off of, I know we briefly touched on it in that first workshop, and perhaps you talked a little more about it in the second, but this idea of inspiration. And I think that inspiration is super important in anything you're creating. You're writing a novel, you're painting a picture, you're taking a photograph. But I think that can come from anywhere. It can come from playing around, it can come from research, it can come from something that you feel inspired by and moved by, and then taking that point to create something else. And my partner Lauren and I were working off of still life paintings. So we would go to the De Young Museum in San Francisco, and we would find a still life painting that we were both somehow drawn to. We didn't go into it with anything other than, let's look at this gallery space, and if there's a piece that speaks to you, let's talk about it. And through that, we found our first jumping off point. And the first piece that we made, we also had just met. It was pretty serendipitous. We were new to San Francisco. There was an opportunity to create something. We both wanted to make something. So we had dinner and we're like, you want to make something? And we did. And then I have this beautiful friendship and collaborative partnership with her since then. We found this painting. It was called Blackberries. And we were drawn to, in the still life room at the De Young Museum, there are these huge floor to ceiling art pieces of artwork. They're very powerful and incredibly realistic looking, obviously, as most still life paintings are. And we found this painting Blackberries, which was about a foot by a foot. And we were really drawn to the intimacy of the piece. It felt like a painting for one. And you kind of needed to be really close to it to really take in all the textures and specificity and arrangement and everything about the artwork. So we found this and we felt, well, this is, we're really drawn to this. We love how it's different than everything else in the room. We like the attention to detail, noticing the tiny little dots of white on the berries, noticing the way the light is directed on the bowl. And so we took that into the studio. So as a dance maker, this might sound familiar or make sense, but we said, okay, we got this painting. What are we going to do now? So we made a bowl phrase and a wall phrase and a table phrase, taking elements that were in the painting. We then decided to break that down more and more and more. And so our restraint that came from this first piece was, how can we make this movement as small as possible? We have this painting that is super small that felt like a painting for one. How can we take some large movement that's reaching across and make it smaller and smaller and smaller until it was broken down to these tiny gestural movements? We later called this Tiny Town between the two of us. So that was we kind of took this inspiration of things we found in the painting. We were not trying to act out what we saw in the painting. We weren't trying to make any commentary on what we saw in the painting. And this piece evolved, taking this idea of keeping the movement really small. I'm going to show you that film in a moment. I'm also going to show you just a visual context, the paintings that we pulled from, and I'll show you a still image of the work that we actually made and talk about the limitations that we used for each of those specific pieces. Please also, if you have any questions, you can always put the little hand up in your Zoom box or feel free to type it in the chat. And again, I recognize that I can go on and on and on. So if you need me to stop, please don't hesitate. It's probably good for me. So share my screen one more time. So this is our website. And just to give context, we were living in the Bay for about 5 years at the same time together. She recently moved to Omaha with her family. I moved to Los Angeles. We're still doing collaborative work across the country, but this kind of chapter has been put on pause or closed. So like I mentioned, we picked a still life painting, and neither one of us are still life, connoisseurs, or it's not something that I seek out wherever I go. I'm very interested in visual art. I have some experience of that in my professional life, but we were just looking for a point of inspiration. So this first piece, which is what the film I'm going to show you is based off of, it's not a complete replica from the stage piece, but reimagining the piece for film. But this was the still life painting. It's called Blackberries. And we were taking the specificity, like I mentioned, these tiny little details, the white in the berries, the way that the berries were arranged in the bowl, where the light is hitting them, and we put that into the work that we made. The second piece that we did is based off of this painting. I believe it's called After the Hunt. And we took this idea of, all of this material is hanging on this door, and this idea of weightedness and dropping down. And so we took that idea and we flipped it. So the entire piece that we did takes place lying on the floor. So that was kind of our restriction and our limitation, was we start against those walls. You can see this is me here lying down. We started up against the walls, slid down in the first few moments of the piece, and then the rest of the piece happened lying on the floor, which was actually very tiring. The third piece that we did, Still Life with Grape Juice and Sandwiches, we were really interested in the arrangement of this piece and how the lighting was shining on that, if we're looking at it, stage left corner. We were commissioned to create this work for a company in San Francisco, and the majority of the piece happened in the upstage left corner. The dancers faced backwards for the most of it, and they did not move from that section for most of the piece. At the very end, they moved down, but we primarily kept them up there. Our fifth work, Lauren actually was commissioned to do this solo. So I can't speak too much to it because she was the one in the room doing the creative process, but the cup we all raced for was the piece it was based off of, and she worked with Max here with this idea of singularity, and I think that there was a lot of kind of like this idea of reaching. Number 4, oh sorry, this was number 5. Number 4, still life with salmon, smelt, and trout, I believe is what this one was. Again, we took this idea of this weightedness, the fish leaning up against the wall, this like heavy idea, and we had these 2 walls created for the piece, for the stage, and almost the entire piece happened on top of, against the wall. And so looking at how you can reorient your canvas, the piece that you're creating, by finding this point of inspiration, and you can reorient that point of view in films as well. And then just one more that I'll show. We did a few other pieces, but still life number 6, we actually found an installation piece for the first time. So we weren't looking at still life paintings, and this was a site specific work we were commissioned to do for Yerba Buena Gardens Festival. So it was outdoors. So we decided we'd venture off a little bit, found this beautiful installation piece. And thankfully, we didn't do it for the entire piece, but the idea was our arms were up like these, the reaching of the legs of the chair for almost the whole piece. And so that's where it started from. And having this point of inspiration, it doesn't mean that that thing has to stay consistent and the same throughout the entirety, but it's your jumping off point, right? If you've made dances before, if you've written a story, if you've painted something, it doesn't have to be what the entire thing is, but it's where you start from. It's that seedling of an idea. So that's just to kind of give you a little context of the limitations we put on ourselves in order to kind of create this world. I'll stop my share and then take it back. Any questions, comments about any of that? Cool. Yes.
I actually know the Doris Salcedo piece, the piece with the
installation,
table,
yeah.
the installation. It was at the MCA quite a number of years ago. And what I remember about that piece live, because I was working at the MCA that time, was the smell, because actually within the tables, grass is growing. And so part of the installation is actually watching the grass grow. Being in the building for months, we got to see it,
Oh, cool.
Grow and be trimmed. Did you take any of the inspiration of like how it smelled? Because to me, that's the biggest thing that I remember about that piece is really like the smell of the earth and the grass, especially after they cut it in the morning, which I loved.
That's really interesting to know. I did not know that. It was at the MoMA, I think, is actually where, and that was, again, our first site specific work we created. So we wanted to venture out a little bit from what we were doing for all of our stage works. Excuse me, we visited the piece a few times, and I do remember noticing that. I don't think we were specifically focusing on that in the creation of the work, but also I think the guests that you had for the first day, she might have mentioned this, some things you might not be cognizant of the fact that you're pulling from that. But we're humans, right? We can't leave what's happening to us or what we take in through our day-to-day lives. We can't just check that at the door. It's imbued. It's going to make its way into whatever our relationships, the work that we're making, because we carry these things with us. And so I don't think that was anything that we specifically were like, oh, let's bring this idea of the scent of this into it. But since we were outdoors, we were thinking about the elements of grass and dirt. And even though we were mostly on a tabletop, like a cement structure, but being outdoors, that was something that definitely we wanted to carry into it. But that's interesting to know that you spent that much time with it, and that was something that stood out. That was cool. Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna show this film that I created. So based off of number 1, which was about the blackberries, I kind of my inspiration for the film is I helped somebody, I took some photos for someone they did a fitness photo shoot. And I don't know if you know San Francisco very well or the Bay Area, but just north of the Golden Gate Bridge is the Marin Headlands. And it's this incredibly beautiful, lots of hiking. You can see the Golden Gate Bridge, you can see the ocean and the mountains, and it's just really, really lovely. And this site where this person was doing this photo shoot was an old army bunker. And so really cool cement structures abandoned. There was graffiti, there was some grass and dirt growing. And it was just, really picturesque. And I thought this would be a great place for a film. Lauren and I made still life #1, and I decided I was inspired by that space and I wanted to translate the piece that we made for the stage and put it in that location and create the space using the inspiration of the site. The movement is the same from the dance for stage piece, but we did not do the whole piece. So the whole piece is about 7 or 8 minutes, I think, the one that we created for the stage. And you only see a section of the choreography. So that's, when it comes to limitations, something that I think is pretty important in making powerful dance films is limiting the amount of material that you use. I think as dancers and dance makers, we can get into this mindset that, well, I got to keep the audience interested. Well, they've already seen that move before. Well, I have to keep it fresh. And I hope that you don't let that dictate your just dance creation, because I think that's also false. But for film, it's like a song. It's helpful to have repetition, to have a place that we come back to that we're like, oh, I know where we are. Oh, I remember this. The audience feels a sense of familiarity and comfort, knowing I know where we've been. It makes sense where we're going. I understand this world that we're in. So I encourage you in your dance film making to not feel like you have to have so much movement. I think you can really limit yourself to the amount of choreography that you use because of all the additional choreographic elements you have with editing. And that's something I can talk about a little bit more, but I'll try to stick to the limitations aspect. So this was still life #1. Again, I was using the inspiration of the location that we were in and letting that kind of be our limiting factor, but also you'll see it gives us a lot to work with. Thank you so much. Thank you. Questions, comments, anything on, anything?
I absolutely loved it. There's a few things that I wanted to point out just for everybody here about shot composition wise, the use of natural light and the location itself. Not only was the location so beautiful, but the way that you all used the location and how it was just another character, but it wasn't the focus of the film. I feel like a lot of times, and I know that I often have to talk my girlfriend out of taking these pictures where she's like this big and then the background's like this big, and you're like, why are you in the photo? You have to make that choice of you're the primary focus of the picture, and the environment, the location is a part of that picture, but it doesn't need to be the centerpiece of it. You can share the screen with it and still have those amazing shots where you're looking through the building and you all are dancing and going back down underneath, and then you can see the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. And it's just such a delicious shot, because you can, I'm watching, and then you guys disappear, and I look out into the background at that vista, and it's gorgeous, and then it comes back, and you guys are dancing again. And all the way with the shot composition. I mean, my favorite one was when one was on the bottom and the other one was on the top, and you have that. It's just absolutely gorgeous. Use the location to its absolute premiere. So just a couple of things for everybody that's here. Especially when you're dealing with location, the sandbox that you guys created, where you guys could not, that was the limitation. You guys weren't going anywhere else. we have this location, we're making this happen here. To get creative, but don't be too overwhelmed by the beauty of it, and make sure that you stay true to what you're actually trying to accomplish and what kind of feelings you're actually trying to accomplish. So, and then use some natural light. I'm a big natural light guy. Sun is the biggest piece of light that you'll ever use. Don't fight the sun, use the sun. And I loved how you guys had the lens flare was coming in at certain times, and it was making a beautiful haze. And even some of the times when it was just shining right through and you couldn't see your heads anymore. Yeah, so I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I'd also just want to say, I should have led with this. Please do not feel like you have to give a qualitative whether you like it or not. That is totally up to you, and I don't want anyone to feel pressured. That's always a thing I feel weird about when sharing your own work. But I think it's also important to show, if I'm talking about stuff, to show you where I'm coming from and what I'm making. But thank you, Frank. I think that's a really great. Another thing I didn't mention before, I am a huge less is more person, and I love simplicity, and I find that can be so powerful. And so, like Frank was saying, using the location as our limitation, but also as our third piece, our third dancer, our third part of the work, and not having to bang you over the head with, look at this beautiful landscape, but just kind of like, oh yeah, we're here, and oh, it's pretty epically beautiful over here, but we're not going to tell you that. Thank you for saying that. Larissa, I think you had your hand up.
I was curious if the music was composed after the fact, or how that process, did you have something in mind already that you were listening to before you prepared the piece, or was it something that came simultaneously with the editing, or completely added, you'd edited it and then someone else came along and composed something for it?
Yeah, great question. So I also, it was in the credits, but Michael Wall, who goes by Sound for Movement, and that's his website, is a dear, dear friend, an incredibly brilliant composer, educator, musician. And that's two of his pieces. And for the work that Lauren and I have made, this hasn't been true in everything that I've choreographed, but we work in silence, and then we decide if and what audio is layered on top of it. We've done some pieces that are entirely in silence, that are mostly in silence, that have some kind of soundscape, that are to an actual song, or composed piece of music. This one, the music that we used for the stage version was another one of Michael's pieces. That's actually how we got connected with him. And he's actually composed for almost all of the work that we've done. It was completely different. So I think I knew that I wanted to stick with his work just because I love his work. I'm going to put his website in the chat because you should know him. He's also super generous with rights and finding giving you affordable options if you need a composer or music to use for teaching or any work you're creating. But so this piece, I started taking the footage and layering it, and I think I started doing the edit and had a couple pieces, and then I was going through his music and seeing what was inspiring to me and the tone that I wanted to use from his work. And I found that first piece with the piano trills. And then from that, I started editing with timing in mind. And then would specifically, and the magical thing that happens in every edit that I make, you'll put one clip in somewhere and there's this beautiful, like it matches up perfectly. You don't have to adjust it. That happened a couple times in this piece, other times where I tweaked it, but it was definitely the music came afterward, but the music is so inspiring to me and it's so lovely, and it moves me to tears at times when I'm listening to it, that it just felt like, kind of like what Frank was saying about the location. It's important to me that it's supplemental and it's cohesive and it works with all the elements, but I didn't want it to be too overpowering. But the movement and the edits started happening first. then the music came in and then they went together as I was editing. Also, Surinder, please let me know if I need to wrap up or what I need to do with my timing.
Yeah, I think Enki wanted to say something, and then maybe we should move on to your next film. We've got like a few more minutes. I think we can have a slightly shorter break because I want to see the other film.
Do I? So I guess I had a couple of questions, and I'm kind of asking this for the course. So just to get people who are watching this to be thinking about these things. So I'll ask you several questions at once. What guided your camera motion? Also, what was the choreography created for the space, or what was what guided the choreography and the space relationship? And then lastly, what was, speaking about your four elements of body, time, space, and quality, in terms of space and I guess quality, how was the sound in the environment, and why did you choose to use just created sounds?
So as I haven't been in all of my films, but I've been in a number of them. And so you can imagine it's challenging and also really great to learn how to talk to a cinematographer and on what you are looking for and the shots that you want. Can you one more time say exactly what the first question was?
The location. What guided your camera motion? Yes.
So that space had it was almost like we had all these different locations within one. We had the like fully surrounded structure where you could see us moving through the windows. We had, the layers where we are on top and underneath one in that little kind of sandboxy, almost like, I don't know, dip of space where there was dirt and grass. This is kind of answering question one and question two. The movement was not choreographed for the space. It was choreographed just for basically a theater kind of in the round almost, really intimate space. And we then took that to the location and used the framing of the location. So you can, I think I oftentimes in lectures will talk about elements of photography that are in with the framing of filmmaking, using the rule of thirds and finding framing in natural elements and things like that. So you figuring out interesting angles and framing that we could find in that location, in and around that location, and then kind of adjusting the movement to those spaces. So we had movement that was set. It was like a 7 or 8 minute piece of movement. And once we got there and I decided, a lot of it happened on the fly. We had set choreography, and I knew some of the shots that I wanted from being there before, but I also gave my cinematographer free rein, and I was like, you're behind the camera, you can see what's happening first. If you see an interesting shot, please go for it. We'll review and whatnot afterwards. So thankfully, Tyler had a really great eye and found a lot of those natural frames and the ability to obstruct and conceal and reveal with the location. But just kind of on the fly noticing, I like this camera angle. Okay, let's use this movement phrase here. I'll step in and out of frame, that kind of a thing. And then as far as like coming in and out of focus, he was just choosing that, making those decisions on the fly as the movement was happening. Obviously, some things we would do again or make a slight adjustment and then film it again. But that was kind of how that happened.
What about the actual motion of the camera?
That I got to give credit to Tyler and Will, who was our other cinematographer. There was he would oftentimes set up a shot and I would either have Lauren just move and I would kind of make some directorial suggestions and changes, but using the movement of our bodies to maybe direct the camera in the way that we wanted it to go. I also talk about the idea of leading lines that you'll see in visual art. You might see it in a photograph or in a painting, that kind of, there is some kind of map and visual line that directs the viewer's eye where to go. And I think that's really important, to use movement as that leading line. So there was one moment where I think I started a turn doing this, and the next clip connected to the turn of Lauren. So some of the movement, a lot of the movement came in the editing element, which I feel like is such an equally strong element of choreography. But a lot of the actual camera movement was Will and Tyler making those choices. And I just thankfully picked people who made great choices to film it.
And the last question was, how did how did you make a decision about whether to use environmental sound or not?
So the sound of could you hear waves and a little bit of helicopter? Those were sounds from that location, but not from the point, not live. There were other people actually in the space at times, and you could hear them talking. And, you know, sometimes with Lauren and I being so far away, we've worked together for so many hours and so long that we have an inherent shared sense of timing. And even when we were super far away from one another, you know, we're using our peripheral vision and we already have this timing in our bodies, but sometimes I'd be like, da, 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 da. We'd have this kind of, you know, soundtrack to stay on time together. But it felt it's such an intimate piece, and we have so many really intimate angles that I wanted to have this element of live audio to also help further establish where we were, that the ocean was nearby, that we were outside, that you could hear, you know, the helicopters and the waves and the wind and all of that. And it felt partially because I wanted to make that intimate connection to make someone feel like they were there with us, but also it worked as a nice transition between the two pieces of music and kind of an establishing, sort of an establishing shot and establishing sound.
And so did you, that's interesting logistically, like how did you get you synchronized when you were far from each other? Logistically, like how did you approach that?
Again, we worked, if you're a dance maker, this might blow your mind or might give you impact, but we spent about 70 hours of rehearsal to make a 7-minute piece. We just drilled and drilled and drilled. And like I said, we just developed this, it's like we're one body, and we've brought this piece back 3, 4, 5, 6 years after we did it, and it comes right back because we've just drilled that timing in so much. And sometimes because we're far enough away or one of us is facing back, we would give counts or give this kind of like sound, this little song that we sing for the timing of the movement. One of us would be saying it farther away because you couldn't see their mouth moving, and other times we just knew the timing so well that it worked.
Okay, so you actually used voice. You didn't use like a big speaker or something.
Correct. Yeah, there was no music playing while we were dancing because we made the piece in silence to begin with. So we didn't have any tempo or notes that we were making the movement off of. So that gave us space where we could also say, slow that down just a little bit, or, you know, repeat that or whatever. So that gave us a little bit of freedom there.
I just want to recognize, I saw Rika's face when you said 70 hours of rehearsal. There's a lot of rehearsal.
So much, and so tedious, but sticking to that limitation of, we were trying to find virtuosity in speed and specificity and unison rather than huge kicks and turns and tricks, also because we can't do that. But drilling that and sticking to that limit of, we need to keep it tight, we need to keep it small, we need to keep it in sync, allowed us to create this more power in the tiny movement.
I also want to recognize time right now. So we should be taking a break right now. Would everyone like to take a break, or would you all like to stick around and watch the second film? Second film. All right, we'll take a short break after the second film.
This is a shorter one, and also please feel free if you have further questions about anything. We have the Discord, so please feel free if there's a question about that film specifically or whatever. I'm happy to talk more about that. This second piece, completely different location-wise. This is a film by Graham Clayton Chance. It's called You. The text and choreography is by Nigel Charnock, who was I believe he's a British choreographer that passed away in 2014, and they were building kind of a portfolio of his work after his passing. I have gotten the rights from this filmmaker to share this work. I think it's just really powerful and can really show how powerful simplicity can be. Speaking of location limitations, this person chose to have a really limiting location and elements in the work, and I think that it by playing around with camera angles and depth of field and all of those things.
That was amazing at how like really close up those shots of the body were. It just loved that it was so tight, that you can express so much with just like a portion of the body, and how powerful that is, especially, and that was, when he first started, he wasn't saying anything at all, but it just kept getting more and more powerful.
Yeah, I find the cinematography to be so beautiful in that shot. And it's just so simple, like he was saying. He's in this very simplistic empty space, no frills. He's just in normal street clothes. He's limited to this very small, he moved a little bit, but basically staying in this small space. And Enki, I think we'll talk some maybe today about, playing with pulling focus. That happened, that the dancer or the performer came in and out of frame, that we didn't have to follow them, that we were getting, the body was being cropped off and the framing was providing really interesting, intimate moments. I could speak more about I've seen a video of the live version of this, and the way the cinematographer, I'll just speak really quickly about it, or the filmmaker decided in the live version, Nigel, whose work this was performing it, and he's, performing it with a microphone. And when he looks over at the end, he goes, he's here, he's over here, he's sitting over there, he's right there, he's there. So he's telling us as the audience in the space, what we see in the film is a glance over, there's silence, and then the camera pans to this other person. In the live performance, in that same kind of neurotic, repetitive way, he looks over and sees someone in the audience and says, he's here, he's over there, he's here, he's over there, what, I can't, he's here. And I thought it was just a really interesting choice. I didn't know this until later, that the filmmaker decided to make that simple choice of, we don't need any communication, it's just a shot, seeing that person off in the distance, and how powerful that is. And I think that changes the tone of the piece instantly. It seems funny and lighthearted at first, and I mean, sadness and humor, it's a fine line. And then all of a sudden, seeing that person he's been talking to them that whole time, it's like, oh, it just completely.
You don't realize until the end that you're watching his heartbreak.
Yeah, yep. So I love that piece so much.
We should take a quick break. Let's take like 5 minutes, refresh your coffee, water, tea, snacky snacks. And then we'll come back with Enki. If you have more thoughts about that video, and I encourage this discussion to continue, because we didn't really unpack that film terribly much. That is what Discord is for, my lovelies. So we saw it together here. And for everyone who is watching this as an archive, you have to be here because we can't show the full piece. You will see a trailer of the piece that we just watched in total. All right, see you back in 5.
Well, I want to say thank you to Jenny for her discussions, and it was really interesting to hear about those ideas of time, body, time, space, and quality. I thought that was a really great way to approach everything. And it's interesting that we always have different principles that we can use to guide our inspiration. And so today I wanted to talk about limitations, and I think our initial conversation, well, the way this, one of the principles that she was talking about was limitations. And so today I want to talk about some principles which are about the limitations just of the camera and taking full advantage of those things. So in light of that, we're going to talk a little bit about, or a fair amount about, the limitations of the camera. And that's primarily going to be around dynamic range. So let's switch over to that and see if I have this prepared. Okay. Well, yeah, it was a, no, let me switch to, there, which is here. All right, so who here knows about or is familiar with the differences between the dynamic range of your eye versus the dynamic range of, say, your cell phone? All right, Larissa. Okay, so the basics of this is that when you have a cell phone, as the picture, as I show you in the picture here, can everybody see the? I think you guys can all see that the element there. So in the, this is an example of like a cell phone's dynamic range, and dynamic range controls, or it's not that it controls. Dynamic range is the amount of sensitivity that you have, that the instrument can perceive. That instrument could be yourself, right? That instrument could also be the camera that you have. And the reason we're talking about that is because when you are taking a picture or doing something with video, you're going to have the limitations of the camera that you have. It might be a cell phone camera, it might be a DSLR camera, it might be a fantastic whatever camera, but it's still going to have limitations. And those things can be great. The cell phone that you have has this capacity where, you know, on a sunny day, it's very bright and it's very sharp. And as it gets dimmer and dimmer, things get darker and darker and darker. And relatively quickly. And you might say, oh, you know, this shot looks so good when I'm looking at it. The light seems subtle and nice and it's wonderful, but I can't seem to get it with the camera that I have. And that is because the way that our eye works is not the same way that our camera works. Our eyes are actually nonlinear. And this is true for our hearing as well. I'm going to show a picture here. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. Well, maybe it is. Great. So here's a picture from one of the links that I put in the workshop, and it shows us a simplification of how your eye works. Your eye is actually more sensitive to grays than to the bright spots. Over here on the right-hand side, that's where things are bright. It's near the top. This is bright. As we go left, things are actually getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer, but we have more sensitivity in this range. And that's because our eyes actually work in a non-linear scale. And this is a logarithmic curve. And what that means is that when you are looking at something, you're actually seeing a compression of the light, and your eyes are shifting so that they're more sensitive to the dark areas, like back here. I'm switched over here. Back here, your eye is really well adapted to seeing subtle gray tones. But the camera, not so much. The camera is actually linear. The camera registers light in a linear fashion, so that when things are dim, the camera's like, oh, I can't see that. And when things are bright, the camera's like, I can kind of see that. But our eyes have a curve to them, and so do our ears. So that's why when we talk about shutter speed, we actually have to double the shutter speed when we want to make something. I'm sorry, when we want to make something dimmer, we have to double the shutter speed, go from like 1/48 of a second up to a 96th of a second. We're cutting it in half. And then we're cutting it in half again if we go from 96 up to 192 or something like that. Or if we go down, we're doubling it. So that's just a simple understanding or a simple explanation of how our eyes are actually, let me put this up here again, are more adapted to this range. Now, if this is our human eye, and we can see these things here are actually bright, and then down, as we go down this way, things get dimmer. A camera or a cell phone, they have even a less range than we do. So for us, this might be kind of bright white, a light gray, but for the camera, it's at the limit, it's blown out. And after that, everything is just pure white. Anything up here would just be solid white. So in this diagram, maybe I should expand this and just make this all one big white range. And then similarly, on the other side, we might say, oh, there's still all this gray down here that we can perceive, but for the camera, it says, no, that's all black. I don't see any distinction there. DSLR camera has a wider dynamic range. It can see a little bit more than a cell phone. What some people, depending on which camera you have, they'll say it's about, I think some of them can get up to like, I want to say 12 stops of dynamic range. That's the lingo around it is like stops of dynamic range. And a stop for dynamic range is one shift in the aperture. If you recall earlier when I was trying to, let me show you a camera aperture. If we go for a stop, there we go. So here in the camera, when we're changing this from 11 to 16, that's one stop. They're just steps in between. Each step is made, as I go this way, I'm letting in more light, and each interval between this is considered one stop. So this lens has a total number of stops of one. It starts at, let's say this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the lens itself is producing 7 stops of dynamic range. So let me switch back. All right, so back to this other. Let me go to. All right, so this image here shows you how in a camera you would have something that's quite bright, and then as things get dimmer, things get dark, everything gets darker. For the camera, it's seeing things in a linear fashion. For us, we're actually the actual light itself. The reality is that we don't see things as they are. We're actually seeing things dropped off at a. This is how much the light is actually dropping off. This curve here is how much light is being reduced. But we have this capacity to see it even when it's, even when it's way down here. we have this capacity to see it. So we're seeing it way down here. We can measure these subtle distinctions. Now, when we are, let me switch back. All right. So do you have any questions about the camera and dynamic range?
So to put simply, it's basically the amount of, or the point at which we see light and dark, and the difference between what our eyes see and what is captured in either the phone camera or the DSLR. And so how that applies to dance is that we need to compensate for what our eyeballs are seeing and what we want to capture on our devices.
Yeah, dynamic range is when something hits it's the full range of what is blown out and what is dark. And that's our range of sensitivity, or the camera's range of sensitivity. It's like, can it handle something that's even brighter? Can it distinguish something that's even dimmer? And things that don't have much dynamic range have a very thin view of the world, right? And things that have a wide dynamic range can see a lot of different grays in between, and go into what we call the dark zone, which way is dark. Let's say this way is dark, then we have more sensitivity there, or the camera may have sensitivity there, or it may not. It might be shifted over here, or it also might just have this narrow window. So if you're for dance, let's say you're filming in a studio and you're a black box theater, so things are nice and dark and you're seeing things wonderfully, but you have your camera, and then your camera's like, whoa, this is way too dark. I can't see anything here. Things are pitch black. Because for us, we can say, oh, from everything from here to here, I see gray, but the camera's like, no. Anything past there is just black for me, for the camera. So when you have a dark situation, then what you need to do is you need to let more light into the camera so that it can pick up on those subtle grays. And the easiest way to do that is to buy an extremely expensive camera. Just kidding. The way we would approach this is to increase the ISO of the camera. You first, well, not first. When you increase the gain on the camera, then what that does is it brightens things up. And the compromise for brightening things up is that you add more noise. But if things are dim, like over here in the background, and you want to brighten that up, then you have to increase your gain in the camera. The other option, if you're going to be filming in a studio or something like that, is you say, okay, I see what looks good for my eye, but the camera doesn't like that. The camera finds it all too dim. So then what you do is you say, I'm going to film in the studio and I'm just going to actually make the whole scene brighter. Come on. There we go. So what you can do is you just actually brighten up the whole studio. And then you say, oh, wow, this looks terrible for my eye. But you're saying, I'm shooting this for the camera, and the camera needs things to be this bright. So what you can do in a recording is you say, I'm going to just film for the camera. And then you brighten things up, because usually humans have a better vision, better dark sensitivity, or a greater sensitivity in the darkness. Obviously, cats have even better. So, but for the camera, you usually have to brighten things up. And what you also want to do when you're dealing with studio things is that you want to reduce the contrast, right? So if your contrast is here, you want to reduce that down so that you get the least contrast, and yet you have a fair amount of brightness. So this might be a great setting for the camera, so that you can pick up what you want to pick up. And then your blacks will be black, but not too black, and your whites will be white, but not blown out. And what I'm doing there is I'm essentially narrowing what is very dark, and also not trying to blow out what is too bright. Now, the other situation, right, is when you can't control the light that you have, right? Let's say you're shooting outside. If you're shooting outside, then you are limited to what the sun is going to do, and also what the clouds are going to do. Now, the great thing about shooting in outside is that clouds are natural diffusers. And by diffuser, I mean something that kind of wraps the light around you so that you don't have a harsh light. When you have a harsh light, you are in something like direct sunlight, right? Direct sunlight is a harsh light, and things are getting brighter and brighter and brighter. Now I'm trying to brighten up the light on the side over here. And you end up with a harsher, this is an easier example, right? So if I'm outside and the sun's out, you end up seeing something that looks more like this, right? Where the light is directly on you. But when it's cloudy, then it's effectively like a softening kind of thing. Imagine a soft piece of plastic over here that's soothing out the light a little bit, which turns out to be wonderful for cameras. Cell phones and DSLRs love clouds. And that's actually wonderful because you can really get some really great contrast and control of your contrast on a cloudy day. And if you're going to be shooting outside, and if you'll see a fair amount of really outdoor movies are actually shot in the outdoors on a cloudy day. These are situations where you have great lighting. So if you have a choice to shoot something for your camera, usually a cloudy day is a better day. Now, the other aspect of this is we want to think about what is the mood that our lighting results in. Because if you start changing, as I was showing you before, if you start changing your lighting, you're going to start changing the mood of the situation that you're in. So in thinking about that, if I start shifting my lighting around, this has a different mood, right, than how I was before. So when you're thinking about your lighting and what your camera is going to capture, you have a tremendous influence of what is the mood that you are creating in your camera. So I think it makes sense to think about that. Do you guys see a change in mood here? Or what mood would you ascribe to this? Let's call it an aesthetic.
Spooky.
Spooky.
It's kind of out of a horror film. I mean, especially with how bright your nails and your teeth and the whites of your eyes are.
Uh-huh.
It's a very dark noir aesthetic.
All right. And then why do you think that we associate this with spooky and noir? How did that come to be?
Historic films?
Okay, so maybe we were trained.
I think because it's like hard to see you specifically. So it adds this element of like mystery and unknown. So anything could happen, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's harder to see color, and then kind of like how you said, if we are trained, maybe way back prehistorically, it's daytime, you can see the dangers, where at night you cannot. So then that's inherently, I don't know what's around you. So then you kind of have to step back and be cautious.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it doesn't work because you have a very bright personality. So if you were, speaking in a monotone, it would have been creepier.
Right. Yeah. So this is something that you have control over. And it's interesting to think about the genres that have been created and developed and how they harness contrast and color. And the things that I'm affecting here is just 3 elements. I'm changing whether something is monochromatic, right? And I'm changing whether something is bright or dark. And I'm changing whether something is contrasty or not. Right. So it's now the brightness is kind of that's pushing the dynamic range because things are very bright or very dark, or that's one thing. And then the contrast is just what's left over when you go all the way to one side. Right. And then the other aspect is just this monochrome. Like, what's the significance of having a broad dynamic, a lot of color in the shot versus only black and white, and here I'm just really like orange. And then what's the emotional or the mood impact of that, of controlling how much color and light you have and the kind of light that you have in your shot. So these are all things that I want people, and I encourage you to think about. Also, I would encourage people to look at the Discord channel that we have and look at the reference films that I put in there, the dance film links. It's in there, and there's a number of films in there. And has anybody had a chance to look at any of the films there? No. Well, they'll be there. But take a look at those and take a look at what colors they use. What kind of contrast are they incorporating? How does the contrast and the color affect the mood of the scene? Are they shooting in the daytime? Are they shooting at night? And then are they shooting on a sunny day? And how does that affect the mood of the piece that they're developing or that they've put together? Now, what are some of the other ways that we can control mood aside from dynamic range in a film or in a video?
I mean, certainly music or sound, whatever sound you use or put on top.
Mm-hmm. Your sound, any other thoughts on ways to control the mood, the emotion of a film?
I think also, like we saw with Jenny's examples, was how close the camera gets to the body. And in the last film, especially, like, my mood completely switched in that last frame when we saw the second person. So we were talking about how that film, like, it was funny and lighthearted and humorous, and then all of a sudden my heart broke in just that one simple camera change and edit to there is a second person. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we have, as you said, there are certainly there's music, which I think we all might recognize this one. And am I here? Can you hear that? So obviously music, and they've shifted. You hear the change?
It's sort of coming in and out a little bit. I can't really hear it, but
Okay.
I know.
You know this.
I know what it is.
Most people might recognize some aspect of that. So yes, certainly music can tremendously affect the mood of something. There's also the cut. Well, I'll say that right for this image here. There's just the tone, the color space, right? If something is blue, or there's when you see a film, people talk about blue. Oh, I'm feeling blue. There is blue, and so there's a lot of color theory involved in the mood of something. Let me dim my. I've lost control of something. Okay. Okay. So that's one other way, is just is using color to affect the mood. Another aspect is is cut frequency. Right. So when you change the frequency at which you're seeing things, then you're also changing the mood, because there can be different excitements if something's going very fast, clip, 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 versus you have a nice long take, right? A long continuous shot that can affect the mood of something, excitement. We talked about just color tone. And then there's also, we can have this, we can have the motion of something. If something's moving, if the camera is moving, then you are also affecting the mood, because you're giving energy to the camera. Or the other way is that it's also just whether the subject is moving or not. If the subject is moving, there's an excitement, perhaps, about how the subject is moving. And certainly in dance, when you're watching someone and they're moving, then they are conveying their energy with just their own movement, right? This is obviously different than something softer and shifting. So think about the movement of the camera and how that might affect the mood of the shot. And then also think about, how is the subject moving in the shot? And then a third element is, how is the subject moving relative to the composition? As Jenny was showing, sometimes they would arrange and have a composition where one character was here and then another character was here, and then their relationship to each other affected, I think we notice what is the relationship between elements, right? If you have a character that's moving independently of the other one and they're just kind of chaotic, that's one thing, versus they're moving in symmetry with each other. And sometimes you'll be able to maybe fix that if you need to, and be like, oh, this person was a little bit late and I've got some white space, I can synchronize them a little bit better, versus I can have one and leave to the other. Our relationship between moving objects establishes a relationship. So there's the relationship that you have between the camera and the subject or subjects. And then there's also just the subject's relation to their environment, to the space, how they behave within the space. There's the color of the scene that you are controlling. There's the frames that you're controlling. All these things can affect the mood that you're creating. And I'm running short on time, so I'm gonna skip a little bit forward and talk a little bit about how to control the dynamic range in your cameras. So for those of you who are in with cell phones, I feel like we need to get to this because we have move on to other things later. I'm going to start. Well, actually, I should back up for a second. Do you have any questions about everything I just said? None? Okay. All right. So let's look what we have here. Okay. So I've got a cell phone set up, and it's looking at this little arrangement that we have here. Sometimes what happens is you have your cell phone and you need to make something actually dimmer. The day is very bright, or you don't have control of the lights, and so you need to make things dimmer so that they're not blown out, right? Your brightness is too bright, things are crazy, and you can't see the whites anymore. The whites are completely blown out. To make things dimmer, on both cell phones and regular cameras, there's these things which are called variable ND filters, right? So here you can see what the background is, and it's just a little ring attachment that you attach to the front of your lens. Usually you attach to the front of the lens. There are some cameras that have a built-in ND filter, and I won't go into that, but they operate exactly the same way. And what happens is, as you can see, like my finger or the background is pretty bright over here, and now it's not so bright, right? So when you have a bright day and you can't dim the sun, as we usually can't, and there's no clouds that are around, you take your ND filter, you attach it to the front of your camera. Let me get rid of the reflection there. And then you just twist this in the direction that dims things. See how that's dimming? Full black. So this is a way to get the shot and the exposure into the gray zone or into the zone that you need. And most filmmakers will use a variable ND filter to achieve this. There's a lot of different prices out there. They range from, I think, cheap, like $30 ones to $300 ones. And there's lots of reviews on YouTube, so I won't try to go into that. I can look it up online if you guys would like that, and give you a links on the side there for a variable ND. Now these are not limited to DSLR or mirrorless cameras. You can get variable NDs that attach to cell phones. So if you're gonna shoot something and it's very bright and you need to make things dimmer, you can get a variable ND also for your cell phone. And they attach, in this one, you get your cell phone and you just attach it to the outside, and then you can have the same capacity and it covers the lens that you have there. And that will get things nice and dim for you. So now, for those of you who don't have variable ND filters, what do you do, or what ways do we already know in order to make a shot dimmer if you are shooting on a super bright sunny day and things are just too bright? So it's very bright outside, you've got your cell phone, you've got to get this shot. What can you do to make the shot dimmer so that your whites are not, or your brightness is not totally blown out?
On the iPhone, if you like touch the frame and the little line with the sun comes in, and you like drag down that little sun, it makes it dimmer.
Okay. Anything else?
Would it be that I don't know if this is for cell phone, but if it was for a camera, would you be making the aperture the lower number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If you lower when you lower the, I'm going to switch. So when you lower when you make the number lower, or I'm sorry, when you make backwards, I said backwards. When you shift the camera towards the higher numbers, you're reducing the light that's coming in. You're making that hole smaller, right? So when you reduce your aperture, you're actually turning it towards a higher number. So this will also reduce the amount of light that's coming into your camera. What's another way that we can reduce the amount of light that's coming into the camera?
Physical, like old school gel filters, things like that we use on stage. You can do them that way. I've done it the old school way.
Okay. What about on a DSLR? Anyone? Okay. So the other option that we have to let light in is, does anybody remember, let's see over here. Let me take away this. I'm going to this, right? So this here is your shutter speed, right? This is controlling what fraction of a second the camera lens is open or the exposure is happening, right? So 1/30th, and these are 1 fractions of a second. So it's actually one, in this case, it's set for 30. So this is 1/30th of a second, right? And then if you go to here, now it's 1/60th of a second. So this will reduce the time that the shutter is open. So every time we do go in this direction, we're reducing the amount of light that's arriving. Now, what's the consequence for this aesthetically of changing the shutter speed? Well, one of the consequences of reducing your shutter speed is that you're going to freeze the motion very quickly, right? Remember, we talked about if you have a shutter that lasts the entire time for the fraction of a second, the frames per second is, let's say it's 24 frames per second. And we were saying earlier that you're going to have half of that being exposed. So you have 24 frames a second, and you are going to only open the shutter for 1/48th of a second, or half the time. Now, what we're doing over here is we're saying, instead of a 1/48th of a second, which would be like a setting I can physically control below this by changing a number down here, but this says 60, but I can change this down to 1/48th. But when I shift to here, I've gone to 1/25th. So if this is 1/24th of a second, and this is 1/48th of a second, and 1/96th, and now 1/25th or something like that of a second, I've frozen things for a very brief period of time. And the aesthetic consequences of that is that the blur that you see of like my hand here becomes tack sharp, right? If any of you have studied photography, when you want to freeze something that's moving, like helicopter blades, you're photographing a helicopter or a carnival wheel or something like that. If you want to freeze motion, then what you're going to do is you're going to switch your shutter speed to very high, right? And now you've only got 1/4000th of a second. And that image is being frozen. And you're like capturing a droplet of water. It's not going to be a blur anymore. It's going to be frozen. So aesthetically, when you switch to this in order to cut down light, you don't have an ND filter and you're using your shutter to cut down light, then the consequence is that you're gonna lose this aesthetic, or you're gonna gain the super sharp frame capture within your video. Okay, so now, right, so there's any questions about that idea? Go ahead.
So if you have many more frames that you are having for this film, does that make it also extremely heavy as far as like, you know, gigabyte kind of thing? Or is it
no?
because
So
of a smaller frame, it doesn't matter.
So there's the frames per second. This is how many shots your movie clip is recording. And usually that's 24 frames per second. That's kind of like the slowest, 24 frames per second. And then that is the setting that you'll specify that in the camera. Within the 24 frames per second, there's how long the shutter is open within your 24. So you're not changing how many photographs are being gathered. You're still gathering 24 photographs. It's how long each photograph is gathering light when you change the shutter speed. So that doesn't make any changes. And so the other thing I'm not saying is I'm not saying we are changing the frames per second for the shot, right? When I'm here, I'm not changing the frames per second of the shot. I'm changing how long each shot is within 24 frames of a second. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, what are the consequences of this? When we talked about reducing the amount of light that's coming into the camera because it's a bright day outside. And let's say initially we were here and it was cloudy, but then the sun came out, right? And then the sun came out and it made things 6 times brighter, right? So now we have to shift this over here because we don't have an ND filter. If I've shifted these up, how is that going to aesthetically change the composition of the shot usually?
So that's where we were talking about the blur. So we're going to go from something that's more blurry to something that's more sharp, that if it's the same day, it affects, I think, continuity, that it's going to look like it's a completely different day, a completely different shot.
So the blurring that we were talking about, the blurring is a byproduct of how long the shutter is open, right? Like right now, Zoom is taking some average of time interval and assembling an image and sending it all to you. And it's resulting in a kind of blur. That's changing the shutter speed or the shutter angle.
Yeah, why don't we take a short break right now? So let's be back in 5 minutes. And hopefully Enki will be back in a second. And we're back. Sorry about that, having some power issues on Enki's front. So we're just going to wrap up the discussion that we're having really quickly, and then we're going to jump back in with Jenny and do our mini project. So Claire, right before or just as Enki's power was spazzing out, you had a suggestion of or an answer to what Enki was asking.
Yes, I believe he was talking about aperture. So when we move that up or down, it affects the depth of field.
That is correct. So those are the compromises that we would make if you do not have an ND filter. So I'm sorry about the beeping going on. It's my power supply, which I can't seem to shut off right now. So yes, if you don't have an ND filter, you can control your lighting with your shutter speed or your aperture, and also your gain. So if you're trying to reduce light, you reduce your gain, you reduce your aperture, and if that doesn't work, you can shut down the shutter speed. But all that is going to change the aesthetics of your film. But if you have an ND filter, then that will, where did I put it? If you have your ND filter, that allows you to reduce the light without changing the aesthetic of your scene. So your blur can maintain, the physical blur can maintain, the depth blur can maintain, and the graininess can be maintained, all by just having an ND filter to reduce the amount of light on coming into your lens.
So we were going to talk about more things, but I think because of Enki's power situation, and now we can't do all of the fancy camera switching, we're going to table some of those discussions for Saturday, where we're going to really spend a lot of time kind of like catching up on a lot of these details and kind of talking more about this, as well as all of the things that we're going to talk about on Saturday. So join us Saturday. It's going to be great. No special guest on Saturday, but just us working through some stuff, I think is what it's going to be. So Enki, any last thoughts before we hand over to Jenny?
So for this coming Saturday, since we didn't get to that this time, I would like people, or encourage people, to look at the apps that I've posted on the Discord link there for, I think it's like, not gear, but I think it's just, maybe it's listed as apps. For those of you who are using cell phones, there's a couple of apps there. There's Filmic Pro, and that is good for camera and controlling the camera. As one of you was saying, on the cell phone, you can just dim things by dragging down on an iPhone the little sun. But if you use Filmic Pro, which is, I think it's like $14, maybe $30, then you could get full control of your shutter speed as well as your ISO. And that's really the top app to be used on both Android and iPhones. So I would like people to have that, because the next course on Saturday, you'll have to install it or have something ready where you can control that. And then we'll have our mini product, and you're going to take advantage of the settings that you can actually control on your camera. So you're going to get the most out of the camera.
I think it is $14.99, I think.
All right, handing it off to Jenny.
All right, I think Enki was planned this specifically so we could work within our limitations. Full circle. Horrible humor. Okay, so the project is simple. Again, I like simplicity, and I think it's really powerful. Working with limitations. So going back to, I can share that. I'll share my PDF again. Did I close it out? I did. I'll pull it up. I'll share my PDF again about the elements of dance and filmmaking, and thinking about whether it is, and you can use a couple of these together if you want to, but using a limitation with the body, you can't do so much if we're thinking about the camera, but time or space. Are you limiting yourself, like in the film You that we saw, to one room? Are you only on the floor? Are you only in your couch? Finding a space that's kind of providing you with some limitations and some kind of boundaries for what you can do in that space. You could do it with the body. You could use as far as camera angle. So are you only filming from an aerial shot? Are you only filming from the floor? But finding a way to play within limitations choreographically. Are you only moving one body part and you can't move anything else? So find a way to kind of limit yourself with your space, with your camera, with your physical body, with the angles that you're shooting from. Maybe it's lighting. Are you doing something only in the dark and catching light coming from, through from the blinds? Find something that is limiting, use that to your advantage to work through that, to come up with a short thing that you film. It could be anywhere from 5 to, well, more than 5 seconds, maybe like 10, 15 seconds to 30 seconds. So keeping it simple, and finding what those limits, how you can expound upon those limits. Expound, that's a word, yeah. Expand, whatever. How you can move through those limits to find something that's interesting. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. How long would you like to give us for that? So what time should we, because we'll upload it to our YouTube and then pop the link in Discord or in the chat. When do we need to be back and ready?
Maybe, does 15 minutes feel like enough time? I mean, the movement could be, it could be super simple, minimal, barely movement. It could be dancier. It's up to you, but give you some time to kind of think about it and play around. Does 15 feel like enough? Or do you need more like 20?
We do have a little bit more time just because the original schedule has it everybody coming back at 11:45, so we can give them an extra 5 minutes.
Sure. Do you want to take until quarter till?
I just want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about, since there's a few of us in the room. So yeah, let's see if we can pop back on at, like, let's split the difference, 11:42.
Cool. And again, simple. Keep it simple. Yeah, a simple idea, limiting body, space, time. Dynamic quality is a little harder, but I'll put that PDF back up in case you want to look at that for some ideas. But
and Jenny, can you send, if you wouldn't mind, that PDF to Frank, and we'll pop that in the Discord as well?
Sure.
I will be giving everybody 5-minute warnings.
Cool.
Thank you. You can feel free to turn your camera off, and we'll see everyone back at 11:42.
And so, I'm sorry, I had maintenance people show up right as y'all started explaining, because there's a hole in our wall that they have to fix. It's lovely. Can you just give me like a 1-sentence rundown of the mini project?
Yeah, just pick a limitation to work within to film something. It could be a limit in your physical body with what your movement you're choreographing and finding an interesting angle to film that. It could be spatially, where you're limiting yourself to the floor, the couch, a corner, and using that limitation and those parameters to work within and film something. So limit yourself in some way, and then film a short 15 to 30 seconds of something that happens in that space, in those limits. And I'll put the PDF that I talked about at the very beginning of class about the elements of dance, if you want to play off of those things and to come up with something to limit from. That was a very long sentence.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to have to log off, I think, of Discord or Zoom here in order to do the mini project, but I will be back on at 11:42.
So I'm sharing that PDF now. So feel free to pull from any one of these things to give you an idea of what you want to limit yourself on. Just give yourself a rule that you need to stick to.
I think that's Rika. Rika, I think you're, hold on. Oh my goodness. Discord. Yeah, Rika, I can't open up your link. It's saying that the video is private. So maybe, or is that Marissa? Oh my goodness. I gotta start giving people nicknames in here.
Why don't we start with Claire, since we
Sure.
know that works, and you can put me last, and if we don't get to me, that's fine. I'd rather talk about everybody else.
Sure. Sound, optimize, share. Great. Okay. That's one that doesn't work. All right. Here we go. Excellent. Did we want to do any commentary, or are we just moving on to the next one?
I like how that provided additional framing for the piece, obviously working within a frame. I thought that was nice.
I like that were you listening to the music while you did it, or did you just do the music on top?
No, I fully added the sound from like one of the free iMovie sounds because I was just going to do it in silence and then my dog started whining. So
I liked that the music was, yeah, an added element, but that you sort of like, yeah, you were completely ignoring it since, I mean, obviously you did it in silence, but yeah, I liked the tight framing.
Yeah, I like how you use the that was your limitation. The window was, yeah, that's very good. All right. Move on to Rika. As I
Good. You.
Another thing is if the filmmaker wants to say what the limitation was that they gave themselves, because it could be that we are interpreting it differently than what they set. So feel free if you want to do that.
I liked how creative that was. I feel like, at least as a dancer, like I tend to overthink things and I want it to be like big and perfect and like this, that, and the other. And I want it to be, you know, this. And you just like took the concept and you're like, oh, limit. That's it. I appreciated that.
But I also liked your little eye on your finger, so that like I think really changed the piece.
Yeah, I think it's really nice that you are using like portions of the body, and that giving that kind of constraint on like aspects of the body, because I think as dancers and filmmakers, the temptation is to say, I need to show the whole body all the time. And I feel like there's a lot of power actually when you have a close-up.
My biggest thing, excuse me, that I was trying though was, I can't tell if everyone can see it because I only see it, but since I have a screen with the waves and then that, you know, that the TV screen thingy that's happening. So I thought, oh, maybe it looks like it's waves, but can everybody see that, or was it? Yeah.
All right, great. So we'll go on to Surrender. And
What I love about giving yourself limitations is it forces you to think differently, or it forces you to work with what you have. And so, you know, that could have been, there could have been all this movement and big kicks and all, you know, like in any of these pieces, but by limiting herself just to the table, it limits what she was able, the body parts she was able to use. And I think that, and similarly with Claire's too, in that space. That's great.
I liked that like the table was clearly like a major part of the piece and it had a lot of focus in the piece, but it also at the same time, like you, how do I want to word this? Like it complimented you more than anything.
I agree. I thought it was part of you, but not overstating it. Yeah, just like what Claire said.
Very good pas de deux with the table.
I think if I had more time to do it again, I would make the framing so you could really just see the top of the table. I think you saw too much of my legs, is what I was seeing. But that's because it's hard to like know what you're getting when you're doing it yourself. And then I wanted it centered, but it wasn't centered because I guess I knocked my camera when I ran to the table. So then it was slightly off, but looking at it, I think that's actually interesting because you don't like part of it, you just see part of my hand. And I think that that's also actually really interesting. Not intentional, but really interesting.
I thought it worked out well. Also, the fact that initially I was like, oh, she's using the portrait orientation, but I thought that worked well with the structure of the table, and that it seemed like your motion was within that, and that you were incorporating the width and the verticality more. But that might just be me reading into it.
No, that was actually the part of the intention. So yes, thank you.
All right, excellent. So off to Larissa. Well, I thought I saw yours and then it escaped me and I found it again.
Well, I'm cheating again. I'm not a dancer for anyone who doesn't know that. And so I went back through some footage where in one case I was, my limitation, I did limit myself when I was videoing it because I was following a creature. And so that was my limitation.
That's a total dance film right there. Eight-legged dancer.
Is he your teacher?
My friend. I spent an hour and a half swimming with her. So.
Oh, yeah. Were you underwater as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Second, my favorite limitation.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we do have some time for the instructors' videos. Do we want to flip a coin? Who gets to go? Or am I just going to choose? All right. Well, we get to see. Yeah, we get to see Enki every day. So let's go with Johnny's. Dun, 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 dun.
Okay, so was that you or was that Najla moving?
That wasn't me.
Uh,
That was me.
oh, that was Jenny's. That was I loved how subtle it was that you know, Claire and I think approached the movement very similarly, and very much dancerly, whereas yours wasn't, but it was still definitely a movement film. And also Larissa's, like, you're not a dancer, but you can see through Jenny's film how you can use movement to be that way. But I do also think like your octopus is a dance film, because like that, like I've been diving as well, and so like I felt it, you know, I felt that movement, and be like, it took me back to that experience I had diving also with an octopus.
I like the pot that you had handy, and that subtlety and the curves that were within that. That was a nice constraint and a nice low angle.
Hey, yeah, so I was just propping it up against my coffee cup, and then I was like, oh, I can see through the handle. So through, you know, that was one of those things where it's like, I mean, I love mistakes, and I think that they provide these like beautiful little surprises, and so then that gave me framing to stay with it.
In the words of the great Bob Ross, happy accidents. Okay, cool. Well, we got time. Enki, let's do you, and then that'll be that's everybody. Ooh, get out of here.
I think you've been taking lessons from Najla.
Hey guys, we're a new type of doctor's office that's providing preventative.
YouTube.
Why is that the next video that pops up after that? That doesn't make any sense.
It's an advertisement for that they throw in before. So yeah, I've been getting tons of those.
That was great. I loved how it wasn't only, you were obviously limiting to the mirror and that framing, but we saw what was happening in the mirror, but we also were seeing what was happening outside of it. So I thought that was nice.
I was in the mindset of just like after having like electrical technical problems, being like, I'm going to make something work today. So.
Excellent. Well, that's all I have on this side here. That's everybody.
Enki, Jenny, any closing thoughts? Or anyone else closing thoughts or questions?
Well, I really appreciated, Jenny, your part earlier this morning. Very informative and really interesting to hear your perspective. So I learned a lot.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And the good thing is that Jenny will be joining us again 2 more times.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I can't say enough. Just play and experiment with the camera, and you know, think less is more. And I do think that giving yourself those limitations or those constraints can really show you something that you maybe you wouldn't have thought about before.
Any last thoughts on my end? Actually, nothing in particular. I guess I would encourage people to go watch the other dance films that are there, and then maybe we can discuss those a little bit this coming Saturday. That would be interesting to hear what people think there. Go and experiment with the equipment that you have. Play around a little bit, see what you come up with, and see if you can challenge yourself with shooting in a way that you have not shot before. So if that's with, like in your case, Claire, try to shoot something with the 70 to 300, at the 300 range, and see what you can get out of that. And then for anybody else, if you don't have an ND filter, then shoot something in high contrast, and really go to the ends of the camera limitations and see what you can compose with that. And I think what we'll do is, if you want to get a little head start, I think next week we will do something with the limitations of that, because I've got a project for that. So get ready and see what you can do with the camera. If you are limited to a cell phone, then look at the links I've provided there. Grab one of those apps, play around with it, get familiar, so that you can upload it and have a little mini project done in time. And then I'll see you all in 2 days.
And Phaedra, I know you were in a different location. Feel free to, and I encourage you to do the mini project for yourself and then post it in Discord. And then we'll all look at it and give you feedback through the Discord, so you can feel like you're learning something as well and experimenting. It doesn't necessarily have to be in real time. So everyone, we're at 12:05. Thank you so much for your participation and comments. This has been fun, even though we started very early. Now we're done. So come back on Saturday, and Saturday is not early. It's back at our 12 o'clock time, or am I just misremembering? You'll get an email confirmation. You'll also get the email confirmation with the video link probably tomorrow. So please come Saturday. We are not going to have a special guest. We're going to catch up on some of the things that we missed out on today and spend more time doing, I think, a project and working through some things, but I think it'll be really interesting. So come armed with your questions. And Jenny will be joining us again on I don't remember the dates. Let me look at my
20-something.
Yeah, we're going to take a little, because next week we take a little bit of a break. Originally we had a break. There's Onyx. A break in the schedule because of something else that was happening in town that is no longer happening because of COVID. But we have a little break, so that gives us a little breathing room to kind of put things in our brain and experiment. I also want to encourage you all, if you haven't already, to sign up for the 2 in-person interactive days at the end of this month and the beginning of next month. We'll be planning kind of like an on-site where we're together in small groups and actually make something together over the course of a few days. So I think that'll be really, really fun. Okay, that's it. Enki, Frank, Jenny, if you want to stick around, but everyone else, thank you.